It's the heavyweight bout I know you've all been waiting to see. In front of me I've got a Proxima and a San Martin. They look very similar to each other, but they also look very similar to the watch that they're paying homage to. I think it's about time we let these watches have a bit of a duff, don't you? So I'm going to pop them inside the watch boxing ring, let them go 12 rounds and see which one comes out on top. Before we let these two heavyweights get into it, quick weigh-in, but instead of weight, we're going to be taking a look at price. Now, the Proxima can be had for roughly $200, slightly less in the sales. The San Martin, $250, and again, slightly under that during the sales. So you would expect the San Martin to be favourite, given it's around 20% more expensive. But in terms of watch money, those differences aren't actually that big. In my last watch boxing video, I compared the Seiko SPB143J1, which is £1,100, to the equivalent San Martin, which is around £180. Massive price difference, and yeah, those watches actually had a pretty good battle. So I'm not actually expecting a price difference of around 20% to have much bearing on the results, so it should be a pretty even competition. Right, I think that's quite enough posturing. Let's let these two get into it. Ding ding, round one. In round one, we're taking a look at the brands, and I don't think there's too much difference actually between these two brands. They're both primarily AliExpress brands. I wouldn't say either of these brands is a huge global brand. In my last comparison video, again, I just mentioned it, Seiko versus San Martin. That really was David and Goliath. On this occasion, it's more sort of David versus David, although I do think San Martin does have the edge. I think they're one of the most successful AliExpress brands, period. Seagull is perhaps a slightly more recognised and successful brand. Well, it is a significantly more successful brand. But San Martin is certainly the best of the rest. Proxima, however, have been around for quite a while. I've had a lot of people telling me about Proxima for quite some time. I've always known their watches were good. It's a closely fought, cagey first round, but I'm going to give the 10 points to San Martin. So yeah, 10 points to San Martin, 9 points to Proxima. Round number two is design, appearance and proportions. Basically the overall look of these watches, and actually there are a few differences. Now the Proxima is a pretty accurate homage of the watch it's paying homage to, the Seiko MM300. The San Martin is much more loosely based on that watch, and yeah, you can definitely see the differences. Look at the size of the dials. The dial on the Proxima is much more sunken into the case. There's a little facet on the inside of the lugs, which is on the original watch, that you don't have on the San Martin. There's a few other changes as well. Screw down case back on this one, a very modular case on this Proxima, which I will talk about later on. In terms of just the overall appearance, I gotta say I'm leaning more towards the Proxima actually. I do like the fairly accurate homage representation, if you like, of this particular watch. So round number two is going to Proxima. Round number three then is movement, and inside this particular Proxima you'll find the PT5000, a Chinese made movement beating at 28,800 beats per hour. Inside this San Martin you'll find the Japanese Seiko NH35 beating at 21,600 beats per hour. Now this Proxima is also available with the NH35, and on top of that you can also pick it up with the Sellita SW200. I think the San Martin's only available with the NH35, so round three has to go to the Proxima. Not just because this one contains the PT5000, which is a slightly more expensive movement, but because you've got three options: NH35, PT5000, or SW200. Nice work, Proxima. Round number four is build quality, alignment, tolerances, you know, all those sorts of things that give a watch a feeling of quality, and I've got to say they're both really nicely made. The Proxima is a lot more complicated than the San Martin because of this modular case that it has. I have produced a video which I've posted on I Like Watches Too, showing me stripping this watch down and basically treating it as if I was going to need to maybe change a movement, for example. I was curious to see how easy it was to access the movement, and I've got to say the build quality is excellent. It's so nicely made, but as you would expect from San Martin as well, this watch is beautifully made. I think the San Martin does edge it though. It just has that extra feeling of quality. The moving components on this San Martin do just feel a little bit more crisp, a bit tighter, just overall nicer to interact with. So it's a really tight round, this one, but I am actually going to give it to San Martin. Round number 5 is Bezel Action, and anybody familiar with my channel knows I love a good bezel action. I treat dive watches as sort of part watch, part fiddle toy, to be honest. Whenever I wear a dive watch, I repeatedly fiddle with the bezel throughout the course of the day. So for me, it's quite an important factor. It shouldn't be, but it is. And the bezel actions on both these two watches are good. I wouldn't say either of them is great. Yes, I've definitely felt better bezel actions. Now the grip on the Proxima is quite low and the resistance is actually quite high, which makes it a little bit more tricky to turn than the average bezel. The resistance is fairly even though, but yes, it's a good bezel action. The lack of grip is a little bit disappointing. The San Martin, however, excellent grip, lighter than average resistance. Yeah, just feels much tighter than the Proxima for sure. The clicks are a bit more muted and there is a tiny high spot just there where the resistance goes up. It's close, but I am going to give it to the San Martin purely because if I was to wear this watch, I would enjoy fiddling with this bezel. If I was to wear this watch, not so much, just not quite enough grip and the resistance is just a little bit too high. Round number 6 is case, and included in that is the crown, the case back and the bezel. Now this Proxima is very interesting. Its modular design makes it a really unusual and interesting watch to own, especially if you like to tinker with watches. You don't access the movement through the back, you basically have to take off the bezel and access it through the front. Yeah, it's definitely interesting, beautifully made, really nicely finished. The crown action is nice, feels tight. The bezel action I've already discussed. Yeah, I like it. It is good. The San Martin, however, is a bit more sort of straightforward. You've got a screw down case back. It's going to be a lot easier to work with. I do think the finishing is nicer on the San Martin. It's obviously not as interesting given it's a fairly sort of standard case design. You know, you get to the movement through the case back. But yeah, they've both got their pros and cons. This one, a bit of a pain to work with, but much more interesting. This one, beautifully finished, but not as interesting, just a fairly standard case. I think I'm going to have to conclude on this occasion. It's a draw. Yeah, they're quite different, but also very similarly looking, and neither one stands out as being my preferred choice. So, yeah, a draw. Round number 7 is dial and hands, and this was actually one of the easiest rounds for me to score. Now, the Proxima is a fairly accurate homage to the watch that it's paying homage to, the Seiko MM300. The San Martin, a much more loosely based homage. And a lot of that revolves around the dial. Look how shallow that dial sits inside the case, and actually it's a bigger dial than the Proxima. The Proxima dial sits quite deep. The applied indexes look, well, quite big in proportion to the dial. The dial itself looks quite small. I do like the look of this Proxima. I mean, it's a stunning dial as well. It's a sort of brown. It's not sunburst, but it's definitely brushed. Sort of horizontally brushed dial. The hands as well, beautifully matching that sort of coffee coloured dial. The San Martin is a much more sort of traditional look, black dial, silver brushed and polished hands. But yeah, for me, the Proxima steals this round comfortably. Really, really beautiful dial and hands and applied indexes. Look at it, absolutely stunning. And round number 8, which is bracelet and clasp, sort of follows on from the dial really, in terms of the Proxima being quite an accurate homage and the San Martin being, well, not even loosely based on the original watch. They've just done their own thing completely, haven't they? It's got this rather large clasp on it that I'm not a huge fan of. The Proxima clasp is much thinner, much flatter, much more discreet. The inner elements are milled, but the outer shell is, yeah, really quite a sort of basic pressed outer shell. The bracelet on the Proxima doesn't feel as nicely finished or made as the San Martin, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's almost identical in terms of its design to the watch it's paying homage to. The links are huge. The San Martin is sort of quite industrial looking, isn't it? But beautifully finished, beautifully made. I'm going to call this one a draw because I do prefer the feel of this clasp on my wrist, although this clasp is better made, and yeah, it sort of follows on with the bracelet as well. I do prefer, I guess, the look and the finish of this one. But this is a much more accurate homage, and actually I still really like the look of it. So I'm going to say a draw in this round. Round number 9 is Crystal, and a bit like Dial and Hands, this was quite an easy one for me to score. I'm not a huge fan of that incredibly strong AR coating on the Proxima and that huge chamfered or beveled edge around the outside of the Crystal. The San Martin has clear AR coating and, well, an almost invisible beveled edge. In addition to that, the crystal on the Proxima probably is double domed, but the visibility on the San Martin is better at tighter angles. So yeah, I do think the crystal on the San Martin is definitely better than the Proxima. Round number 10 should be a fairly easy one to score because it's a loom test, and well, you know, you're just looking at the loom and looking at the degradation, and I think there's a fairly clear winner, although there's not a lot in it. The initial burst from the Proxima is fractionally better than the San Martin. They both fade around the same amount. I've done a loom degradation test for a few hours, and I think the Proxima just about takes it. Really, I'm focusing on the hands, and there's not actually too much in it with the hands, but I do think the Proxima is fractionally stronger, so I am going to give this round to the Proxima. Round number 11 is Comfort, and that's something that we don't always get to explore before we buy these watches, because, well, in particular watches from AliExpress, we only get to wear them once we've got them in our hands, and so reviews like this or videos like this do prove to be quite useful. And I can tell you, the weight of this San Martin is far more evenly distributed throughout the watch, which does make it a touch more comfortable in that sense than the Proxima. I think the case is slightly lighter, but the bracelet and the clasp are heavier. I mean, you can see, you know, they are a little bit more chunky than the Proxima. There is a lot of weight in this Proxima case, and the bracelet and the clasp are more discreet, so the Proxima does feel more top heavy. Having said that, I wear my watches on my left wrist. I am left-handed, I write with my left hand, and so wearing a watch like this San Martin with a particularly chunky bracelet and clasp can be a little bit, I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but I notice it far more than I would if I was wearing something like the Proxima. So more even distribution, less noticeable under the wrist when I'm writing or typing, so this one's a draw. Round number 12 is the Tingles, the X Factor or other. Is there anything else about these watches that makes them stand out? Now, I've had this San Martin for quite some time. This is the watch that really started my obsession with the Seiko MM300. It has fast become one of my favourite case shapes. And I did obsess over this watch quite a bit, actually, when I first got it. Strong, strong Tingles. Having said that, since this Proxima has arrived, my attention has been on this Proxima, partly because it's new, but also because it's just so different. So this one's another tight round. They both give me tingles. This San Martin still excites me. I love the finishing, the build quality, and the look of it. This Proxima definitely gives me the tingles. Just love this dial. Love the fact that the case is just so interestingly put together. It's a really accurate homage of the watch it's paying homage to, and I love that watch anyway. So I'm going to call this one another draw. Now at this point you'd probably expect me to go back to price and say, well, because the San Martin's more expensive, obviously the Proxima is the one to go for, but the price difference, albeit 20% odd, I still don't think in watch world, in the world that we live in with watches, 20% is pretty much nothing. They're virtually the same price. You know, some watches can cost, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds, and some can cost £20. So in terms of price difference, I don't think that extra 20%, that extra $50 is going to be enough for you to say, well, I absolutely then should get the Proxima, because I don't think $50 is enough to persuade someone to get one or the other. Now, I can honestly say I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about this summary. It's one of the most difficult summaries I've had to give, and so because of that, I've actually written some stuff down. I've sort of copped out a little bit. It's just too close to call this one, so these are my thoughts. I'll wear the San Martin more and I'll fiddle with the bezel more, but I'll tinker and look at the Proxima more. In its watch box, I'll get it out, I'll have a little fiddle with it. Yeah, so I'll wear this one more, but I like interacting actually with this one more. If I wanted to demonstrate the kind of quality and value for money that's available on AliExpress, I would show someone the San Martin. But if I wanted to demonstrate the sort of quirky, interesting watches available on AliExpress for incredible value for money, I'd show the Proxima. Now, if I was being forced to lose one of these watches, if for whatever reason I had no choice but to lose one and I could keep the other one, which one would I lose? I actually think it would be the San Martin, because I've got quite a lot of watches that are constructed like this. Screw down case back, stainless steel case, bracelet, clasp, you know, fairly sort of standard looking Seiko dial, nice bezel actions. You know, this watch isn't that unique in my collection, if you like. Whereas this Proxima, I've got nothing like this in my collection. The way this watch is constructed is so unique and interesting and unusual. And that dial, hands and applied index sort of set, if you like, is so beautiful. If I really had to get rid of one, it would be the San Martin. I would probably keep the Proxima. Right guys, I hope this video has helped anybody out there struggling to decide which one of these two watches to buy. Yeah, I'm sorry that there isn't a standout champion or winner on this occasion, but the purpose of these videos is really just to break these watches down to help you guys make your own decision. It's such a tight call. Honestly, on a different day, I probably would have given away the Proxima and kept the San Martin, but today I'm just feeling like I want something a little bit different, so on this occasion it would be the San Martin that would get booted out. But yeah, really close call guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know in the comment section what you think of these two watches. I always enjoy reading your comments, and I know that they are very helpful to other people reading them as well. Take care guys, look after yourselves. You'll see me again very, very soon.